Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Just the name, it makes you think of something really impressive, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But what if the truth is, like, even more fascinating than the stories?
Well,
What if they never even existed?
right, yeah. That's the big question we're going to try to answer today. Did they actually exist?
It's a mystery that's been puzzling historians, what, forever?
Centuries, at least. I mean, we have these amazing descriptions from ancient writers, Greeks, Romans, you name it. But when you look closer, it gets kind of complicated.
Okay, so for this deep dive, we're using the Wikipedia article on the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. It lays everything out, the evidence, the theories, the whole shebang.
Right.
So you can listen along and decide what you think.
Exactly. We'll be your guides through this historical maze.
Perfect. Let's get started with those ancient accounts, the ones that kind of got everyone's imagination going in the first place.
Right.
We got writers like Berossus, Diodorus, Quintus Curtius Rufus, all writing centuries after these gardens were supposed to be built by King Nebuchadnezzar II.
Mm-hmm. For his wife, Amatus.
Right, Amatus. From Media.
And that's where things start getting interesting, don't you think?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because these accounts, lots of details, very colorful, but they're all over the place.
Like what?
Well, they can't even agree on the basics. Like, what shape were these gardens? How big were they? Even why they were built. Some say it was this big romantic gesture, right? A king trying to make his queen feel less homesick. She missed the mountains.
Aw, that's kind of sweet. A love story fit for a king. But, okay, here's where I get confused. Nebuchadnezzar, he was known for, like, bragging about his achievements, right? We have records of his palaces, temples, all that stuff. But no gardens.
That's the thing. No mention of this incredible garden, which was supposed to be, one of the wonders of the world.
That's super weird.
Yeah, for historians, that's a big red flag. I mean, absence of evidence doesn't mean it didn't exist, of course.
Right, right.
But you got to wonder, if it was so amazing, wouldn't he have bragged about it?
Totally. So maybe, just maybe, those ancient writers, they got things mixed up.
It's possible. Maybe there's another explanation for all these stories.
Like what?
Well, this missing piece of the Babylonian puzzle, it leads us to a totally different theory. And this one moves the action from Babylon to another big Mesopotamian city, Nineveh.
Nineveh, wait, that's like hundreds of miles away. Tell me more.
All right, so this theory, it was put forward by this Oxford scholar, Stephanie Dalley. And she suggests that what everyone thinks Nebuchadnezzar built in Babylon might actually have been built by King Sennacherib of Assyria in Nineveh, around 700 BC.
Okay, whoa, this is getting good. So how did this theory explain those old accounts we were talking about?
Well, think about it. Babylon wasn't just the name of one city. It was used for several cities in Mesopotamia.
Ah, okay.
So those writers, centuries later, they could have gotten their locations mixed up.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Especially with all the translations and stuff, it's easy to see how things could get messed up over time. But what about the gardens themselves? What makes Nineveh a good candidate?
Well, unlike Nebuchadnezzar, King Sennacherib, he loved to boast about his gardens and his water engineering. In fact, he straight up called his palace a wonder for all peoples.
Wow, okay.
Oh, and one more thing. Nineveh was right on the route Alexander the Great's army took. And his historians, they gave us some of the earliest descriptions of the Hanging Gardens. So the timeline starts to fit a little better, right?
So we're thinking maybe it's a case of mistaken identity, like history got a little confused and gave Babylon the credit instead of Nineveh.
It definitely adds a whole new twist, right?
Yeah.
And Sennacherib wasn't just talking a big game either.
Oh, yeah.
He was a serious engineer. Like, he built this crazy system of aqueducts over 50 kilometers long just to bring water to Nineveh.
Wow.
And get this, he even used water-raising screws.
Water raising.
Screws, like a screw that lifts the water up.
Hmm.
Super advanced for the time. All to get that water to the higher levels of his gardens.
That's pretty clever. It's amazing what they could do back then, with all the technology we have now.
Right. They were so smart. And here's something else that makes the Nineveh theory even more interesting.
Okay, what's that?
There are these wall panels that survived from Sennacherib's palace. And guess what? They show the gardens.
No way! Like actual pictures of what might have been one of the seven wonders.
Exactly. It's pretty amazing, to be able to see what they might have looked like.
I'm going to have to look those up later. So, okay, if Sennacherib was such a genius with this engineering and gardens, and he loved to brag about his palace being this amazing wonder, why don't we hear more about him? Why did his story get lost?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, time does its thing. Cities get destroyed, records get lost. It's like trying to put a puzzle together when you're missing half the pieces.
Yeah, that's true. But isn't that part of what makes history so interesting?
Oh, totally. The challenge, the mystery.
Hmm.
You never know what you're going to find.
Right. And with the Hanging Gardens, it's like this super captivating mystery.
Definitely. Whether they were in Babylon or Nineveh, they represent something bigger than just some cool plants, you know?
What do you mean?
They're like a symbol of, like, pushing limits, creating beauty even when things are tough,
Yeah.
shaping the world around you.
Yeah, that makes sense, like a testament to human ingenuity.
Exactly.
Speaking of ingenuity, those aqueducts Sennacherib built, I bet they weren't just for looks, right? They probably helped the whole region.
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. Mesopotamia is pretty dry.
Yeah.
Controlling water meant controlling everything.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So his aqueducts, they were about survival. They let them irrigate all this land, turn desert into farmland.
Wow, so it wasn't just about beauty, it was about, like, power over nature.
Totally. And it's interesting to think about how those ancient innovations connect to things we're dealing with today.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, just like Sennacherib's aqueducts changed Mesopotamia.
Yeah.
We're trying to figure out water scarcity, sustainability, all that,
Yeah.
trying to make cities greener.
Yeah, it's like we're still learning from them.
We are. Oh, and speaking of modern connections, didn't you mention something about Sennacherib and bronze casting?
Yeah. I read that he was really good at it, like ahead of his time.
He was. He claimed he figured out this lost technique for making huge bronze statues.
Wow, that must have been incredible to see back then.
Right. I mean, imagine the skill it took to make something that big with the tools they had.
So he was pushing boundaries in engineering, gardens, and metalworking. This guy was like a Renaissance man way before the Renaissance.
I mean, it was pretty amazing. And just like the Hanging Gardens, he's still fascinating people today.
Okay, so we've gone from love stories to lost records, from Babylon to Nineveh, ancient aqueducts to modern problems. It's been a lot. As we move on, what are some things you think our listeners should be thinking about?
Well, I think the main takeaway is that history is rarely simple. There are twists, contradictions, missing pieces. The Hanging Gardens, they remind us to question what we think we know, explore different viewpoints, and remember that the past is complicated.
It's like we're detectives,
Yeah.
trying to find clues and put the pieces together.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes those missing pieces, they're just as interesting as the ones you do find.
Right. Like with the Hanging Gardens, we don't have that solid proof, the archaeological evidence. And I think that makes them even more mysterious.
It does. It lets us imagine what they might have been like, really picture them.
And it's funny because even the fact that they're gone, whether they were in Babylon or Nineveh, it makes them even more fascinating.
How so?
Well, it reminds us that things change, Civilizations rise and fall. What's here today might be gone tomorrow.
That's a good point. It makes us think about lost beauty, lost power. It's kind of sad, but also beautiful in a way.
Exactly. It makes me think of other ruins like the Colosseum or Angkor Wat, the pyramids. Those places make you feel a sense of wonder, but also kind of melancholy.
Definitely. They make you think about the people who were there before us, all their stories.
And in a way, because the Hanging Gardens are gone, we connect with them differently. We have to use our imaginations to recreate them.
That's true. We become part of their story, in a way.
One thing that really stood out to me in that Wikipedia article was the description of all the different plants. Date palms, olive trees, cedars, myrrh, they had it all.
Yeah, it sounds incredible, right? And it shows us something else about these gardens. It wasn't just about being pretty.
What do you mean?
Well, it took a lot of knowledge to grow all those plants, especially the ones that weren't from the area. They had to be experts.
So it was like a showcase of their skills, like a living museum of plants.
Exactly. And think about it. Back then, traveling was a big deal. The world felt much smaller. So seeing all those different plants, smelling all the different scents, that would have blown people's minds.
It must have been amazing. All those colors, the smells, the sounds of the water. You can almost picture it.
And we can't forget the symbolism either. In a place like that, surrounded by desert, a lush garden, that would have been a powerful symbol. Life, abundance, humans controlling nature.
It makes sense that people connected it with paradise.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, maybe those gardens weren't just a place. Maybe they were a symbol of something deeper, like our desire to connect with nature, find beauty, feel peace.
I think you're right. Maybe that's why we're still so fascinated by them, even though we don't know exactly where they were.
It makes you think about our own legacy, doesn't it? What are WE doing that people will be fascinated by in 1,000 years? What will our wonders be?
That's a good question. Maybe it's not just about buildings. Maybe it's about how we live, what we
Mhm.
create, how we treat the planet.
That's a great point. Well, everyone listening, think about that as you go about your day. What will your contribution be? What amazing things will you leave for the future? That's all for our deep dive into the Hanging Gardens of Babylon.